All right, let's now welcome Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, who's a climate expert, to weigh in on this symposium. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. So this symposium actually comes at the back or heels of current as well as worryingly devastating weather patterns in the country. What do you think this sitting could possibly seek or uncover as some of those possible solutions to address this situation?
Thank you very much. I think it's very commendable for government to be convening this symposium. As you've said, we've been going through a series of devastating weather extreme-related events, some which have been linked to climate change. And finance, access to climate finance is central to building resilience and future resilience, especially the sustainability of the financing, through accessing grant funding and concessionary funding. Some of the things that the summit, the symposium, can definitely look into is, developing integrated and systems approaches in terms of identifying opportunities and gaps for interventions, prioritizing poor and vulnerable individuals who tend to be disproportionately affected by these disasters, and also focusing on strengthening and promoting local solutions, the capacity of local municipalities that are at the face of dealing with some of these extremes is very important. And also thinking from an outcome-based approach in terms of, considering people's well-being, dignity, and equity in a society such as South Africa, because climate change is worsening some of these inequalities. And in terms of the focus on policy, I think it should focus on policy coherence, because a lot of the challenges that we have are in terms of lack of coherence in policy, which then creates implementation gaps.
Very interesting that you mentioned that, Prof, because I don't know if you heard the insert before our interview. I mean, the issues of suggestions like phasing out the use of coal-powered stations as well as entities, as well as the introduction of just energy. Meanwhile, we are still dealing with an energy crisis in the country. How do we get around that issue?
So that has been a huge debate in terms of what we call the just energy transition. And I think for South Africa, we have to perform a balancing act because, as you mentioned, we've got an energy deficit. So we still need to increase energy generation for us to industrialize and create jobs in terms of manufacturing. At the same time, we need to start moving away, shifting away from the use of fossils such as coal. But this has to be balanced with protecting livelihoods and communities and jobs in those areas. We've got whole cities that are dependent on the core value chain. So we have to look at when we introduce, the renewables, we need to reskill people, equip them with new skills that will be relevant with the renewable energies. We also need to look at the economies of these townships that were centered around the core value chain and repurpose them also so that no one is left behind in that context. So it's really a balancing act that South Africa has to play in this guide. And I think the international community has to come in strongly with significant grant funding to support that transition.
And speaking of balancing acts, Prof, I mean, we understand that heat waves and droughts will actually become more frequent and even last longer in the country, taking into consideration that limit global temperature rise of course, 2 degrees Celsius. We have seen persistent patterns recently of inclement weather, but do you think we are able to then mitigate as well as apply the necessary measures in place? And what could those be? Because I think if you saw also in relation to our previous insert, the lack of preparedness on the level of government when the need actually arises in terms of disaster management due to inclement weather is just not at a state where it should be at this stage.
Okay, so there are several actions that need to be taken. Firstly, government needs to prioritize investments in the observation and hydrometeorological monitoring system, which has dilapidated over the years. The importance of this is it allows us to be able to monitor and predict some of these events in advance. That would then lead into investments in community-based early warning systems, which would allow the information to get to communities with enough lead time for them to be able to take action to protect themselves. There's also need to invest in the capacity of disaster management officials, especially within local municipalities, to be able to be proactive and take proactive actions, not just responsive actions that we currently see where things happen and then government comes in after the fact to help people, recover. So there has to be significant investments in climate resilient infrastructure, which can accommodate and deal with these extremes that we are seeing. There has to be significant investment in ecosystem-based approaches, because a lot of what is failing is ecosystems and their capacity to attenuate some of these extremes. So various actions, as well as including investments in capacity development of government and municipal officials.
And Prof, maybe in closing, let's talk about then the direct problems that are caused by climate change, as well as the effects on the environment, particularly arising from the climate change.
So the direct effects of a warming climate really is you've got more moisture that the climate is able to hold. So when you have rainfall events, they will tend to be heavier. In South Africa, we are going to have increasing dryness, water scarcity. So we have to juggle with water scarcity, which we already have as a country. And at the same time, we have to deal with, floods when we do get the rainfall. On the other extreme, we have issues of land degradation. And the land degradation also forces people to move into low-lying areas and settle on wetlands and other areas which are unsafe, which eventually means when we've got floods and these sort of things, those people are vulnerable and tend to get affected. On the other end of it, there are things that we don't really talk about as a lot, such as the climate and the health interactions. With increasing temperatures, it has huge impacts for farm laborers who work in the open. Women in particular who fetch water over long distances. There are issues to do with the health, especially water quality related health issues, as people will start accessing unsafe water. We've already had outbreaks of cholera in certain parts of the country, and that could worsen. Diseases such as malaria, which we had gotten away from, could creep back in as temperatures, warm up and we've got water hanging around. So there are diverse issues that really we have to be concerned about, which hopefully this symposium will be able to address and come up with very strategic and systematic ways to address them.
Absolutely, Prof. Not issues of not having enough food, as well as poverty and displacement, are some of the issues that I don't think a lot of people associate with, of course, as related or having a direct link to climate change. Thank you so much, Prof, for your input this afternoon. That is Professor Tafadzwa Mabhaudhi, and of course, it was weighing in on the symposium, the 3-day Climate Resilience Symposium that will be hosted by National Treasury, and of course to look at some of the issues as well as mitigating some of the issues pertaining to inclement weather.